All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am Stephanie Pedrosa, the Senior Marketing Manager at Origo Software Technologies. And I want to thank everyone for joining us in Origo's webinar series. We've been hosting these industry webinars for over 3 years, and we want to thank everyone for your continued support. And in today's discussion, our panelists will share insights on how agencies can accelerate the overall right-of-way process. Now, a few quick notes before we get started. The webinar is recorded, and we will provide all registered participants with the recording. The slides will also be provided to all registered participants. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them via the Q&A chat box, and we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. If we don't answer questions during the available time, we will follow up with you via email. And joining me today is our VP of Marketing, Richard Kramer, who will be moderating today's session. Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Stephanie. Great to be here.
Thank you. Now I'm really excited to introduce our panel of experts. Joining us today, we have April Hall, a seasoned real estate specialist with extensive experience in managing and maintaining government-owned transportation facilities and infrastructure. Formerly a program analyst at the District Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C., she ensured compliance with federal and local regulations for transportation projects. At the Maryland Department of Transportation, she oversaw the operation, repair, and maintenance of government-owned properties. Her career also includes roles as real estate officer for Baltimore City Housing and lead title specialist at Lawyers Advantage Title Group, and showcasing her versatility and depth of knowledge in the real estate and title research sector. April holds a Master's of Arts in Legal and Ethical Issues and a Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Arts from the University of Baltimore, as well as the Associate of Arts in Paralegal Studies from Baltimore City Community College. April, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks. Next, we have James Olszewski, a seasoned professional land surveyor with over 30 years of experience in designing and acquiring right-of-way for Utah Department of Transportation, both as an employee and a consultant, and is now the right-of-way program manager at Kimley Horn. He began his career working on major roadway projects such as Sardin Canyon, Pogo Canyon, I-15 in Salt Lake City County, and the Mountain View Corridor. James also taught transportation design using MicroStation and inroads to State Department of Transportation's and Fortune 500 engineering firms. He holds degrees in architecture and surveying, along with NICET certification in roadway design, is an active member of the Utah Council of Land Surveyors, and has served as a past Salt Lake City chapter president. Within the International Right-of-Way Association, he holds SR/WA and R/W/NAC designations, is a climb certified instructor, and has served on several committees, including the past Chapter 38 president and vice chair of the International Transportation Committee. James, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And finally, but last but not least, we have Jeff Coleman, who has a comprehensive 42-year history in transportation engineering, policy, and program management, with experience in both public and private sector leadership. He provides exceptional wisdom and insights in all elements of program and project delivery from the perspective of the owner and the consultant. The first 27 years of his career, he was engaged in program delivery for Colorado Department of Transportation, and the last of those 9 years, he was a region director. The past 15 years, Jeff has an executive leader in the transportation and infrastructure engineering business, gaining excellent insights into the mindset and ambitions of this industry. Throughout his career, Jeff has been engaged with training for engineering applications and processes, and most recently has been providing an array of training for government engineering consultants and contractors. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Excited to be here, and good day to all of our guests.
Thanks. And before we get started with this discussion, we're going to launch a quick poll just to get to know what organization you're joining us with. So if you can take a couple of seconds to launch the poll. Which of the following best describes your organization? Are you with roads and bridges, water and wastewater, rail and transit, electric grid and green energy, or other? So if you can take a couple of seconds to answer the poll above. And it looks like only 1% so far. So please go up there and answer the question.
Go ahead. If your agency actually deals with more than one of these, just pick the one, I guess, that you're most involved with on a day-to-day basis. We like to see sort of the breakdown within the public sector of where our audience is coming from.
right, I'll wait until it gets to about 50%. All right. So majority are roads and bridges, 1% at water and wastewater and rail and transit. All right, and the second poll question, which of the following best describes your role? So pick the role that best applies to you. And we'll give it a couple of seconds. So it doesn't look like any, oh, there we go. And I'll wait until about 50% of our audience has submitted the poll. All right.
Sometimes it takes a few seconds for it to update on our end.
So about a couple of project managers, engineers, consultants, and admins. All right. Well, now I'll hand it over to Richard and we'll get started.
All right. Thanks so much again, Stephanie, and very warm welcome from me to our audience. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. We love talking about right-of-way and right-of-way associated topics at Origo with our customers. And right-of-way touches on a lot of other areas like land acquisition and management, just property management, appraisals and surveys and all those things. And it's always very interesting to chat to our customers about not only how they do these specific things, but how they sort of intersect with the overall running of a public agency, or how they intersect with a long-term multi-year capital program. And so these are the things we really enjoy discussing. I, as someone who's sort of been in the industry for almost 20 years now, I've always felt like right-of-way doesn't get enough attention. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion with a great panel here who are going to share some of their knowledge and some of their stories when it comes to the process. And you see the kind of agenda we'll walk through right in front of you there. So we'll dive into land acquisition and visibility and reporting, and then talk about the legal side of things, the technology side of things. So let's dive right in. And the thing I've always found interesting about this side of a capital program management and running an agency is how it's kind of like a set of very detailed, very almost regimented processes, and yet every project you do is different, and probably each property almost that you're dealing with on a project can be different as well. So let's talk about some of these big picture challenges, because making a mistake can cost you both time and money, and frustration, I guess, personal frustration. And every now and again, you'll see a story in the news about either right-of-way or property management and so on. And the Florida story you see on the screen there is actually kind of interesting. Maybe we'll talk about it in a bit, but I want to dive in and get to the panel. So April, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us about some of these challenges you've encountered in your career with the right-of-way land management process?
Yeah, working at DDOT, which is the federal city, you're faced with a lot of challenges because a lot of people don't know is that in the district you have what's called floating squares. So you have to really kind of understand where the property line is versus where the adjacent property is. And because it's more than just property owners, you have federal agencies that you're dealing with. You have to be engaged and be engaged early. You have to be able to make sure that you have surveys done, and also just the challenges of really kind of coordinating with other agencies, just as federal agencies. Those can be a little bit challenging because you have a lot of stakeholders involved, and you have to make sure that you keep your projects on schedule, but in the same sense, you still have to keep them engaged and keep them in the forefront of, okay, how are we affecting their property? Do we have interest? Can we get interest in that property? And most part, sometimes those are the challenges, especially when you have to go to condemnation. which can delay a project. So you try to really sit down and figure out a really comprehensive schedule to keep the project moving and going.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great example to start off with. If you have a project where you have, involves both public land or property and private land, that's potentially two completely different sets of activities you have to go through there, with obviously different stakeholders. Jeff, I'm going to go to you next. What do you see big picture as some of the challenges you've faced in your career?
Yeah, I see three major challenges in the right-of-way process that just jump out right away to me. First of all, it's typically the second most costly part of a project development besides the actual construction cost. So as a result, there's a lot of visibility and a lot of attention because you're spending a lot of money on the behalf of the government agency that you work with. The second thing is because it touches normal citizens, local landowners, business owners, it gets very political, particularly if you're in a city or a county where the mayor, councilman, or county commissioner may know one or other of the stakeholders, the landowners you're buying from. They get a big interest in that. And so therefore, they're very concerned that their constituents are being represented and taken care of well. And third, and probably the most important thing, and I saw there was a lot of project managers on our call today, is that the place that right-of-way really begins accelerating is when so much of the design is already done, NEPA's been completed, and now you drop this 12 to 18 month process right at the kind of 2/3 way part of the project, and it appears to be a big delaying factor. So when you put all those pieces together, it really becomes a big challenge for a project manager or an engineer to manage.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Definitely. In fact, I think as you said, it's often on the critical path of the whole project. So it just gets that level of visibility and that level of importance. James, let's go to you. Big picture, how do you see the landscape and some of the challenges we face in it?
So the irony is it started with your initial assessment that you mentioned as far as, right away getting the attention and what attention does it get, and which Jeff alluded to as well. The irony is right away sometimes it gets a bad rap, and it has this negative connotation that, right away is there to unfortunately do harm, not good. And when done properly and when involved early on, right away is a great thing. I mean, even when we were talking and April mentioned condemnation is not a bad thing. And everybody starts to freak out about what that means and what that process is. And the key is trusting the process. And when you trust the process, two things need to happen. One, and we have, like Jeff mentioned, all these project managers on, you have to get right-of-way design and right-of-way acquisition, two different disciplines, engaged early. If you wait until the end, then you try to bring in as many team players as possible to get it done, and you end up with not only too many chefs in the kitchen, but the irony is a lot of times you can't bring in multiple people to solve the problem. Some projects, the more people you bring in, not a problem. But for the big picture for us, you got to bring in this specialty and these specialists, these professionals who know what they're doing and how to get engaged and bring them into this. And when you do that, and there's another subtlety to this that we kind of eliminate sometimes, and that is the public involvement in the right-of-way process. When you involve public involvement and they're out meeting with the landowners, and then you tie that connection with those people who have already had the connection with the landowners, because exactly what Jeff mentioned, you're engaging with your neighbors. And whether you realize that or not, our stakeholders are our neighbors. They're our citizens. We're impacting them just like if we were to be impacted. And we need to look at that. And there's the difference, again, of being empathetic and sympathetic. And how we go through those processes matter. And when you trust, like I said, the process, it's amazing what gets done and how fast it gets done.
Yeah, James, you said something just brought up, and you as well, Richard, at the beginning, but what makes right-of-way such a unique process is it's highly technical. We're dealing with precise measurements and very precise process. Two, it's legal. I mean, we're talking about conveying properties, and it's a very legal process. You know, as April was mentioning, condemnation, extraordinary legal process. But third, and James touched on this, it's a very interpersonal process. So to be exceptional in the right-of-way process requires all three of those skills in spades. You better be very proficient technically. You better have a good understanding of the law and the process of law. But importantly, as James said, you got to know how to be empathetic, sympathetic, and deal with people as they're dealing with something that is very difficult for them, the loss of a personal piece of property.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we stress when I was at DDOT is with a lot of our engineers and our project managers that it's always best to get right away involved as early as possible. Not in the middle of your project, not towards the end, because if something is wrong where the design is encroaching on another property or we're affecting another, one of the adjacent properties, those are things that we could have planned for or try to organize early in the process, because those are some of the things that can delay a project from moving forward.
And I think April hit a key there, because neighbors talk. When you have one neighbor impacted one way, we all assume that a project affects everybody the same. Well, no two properties are the same. No two landowners are the same. The impacts are 100% different. And you get these communities that will talk, and whether it's the neighborhood, at church, at school, everybody talks. And so the key now is getting in front and making sure that it's not just the message, but explaining and educating everybody who is impacted on what those impacts truly mean. And then as the acquisition agent, being able to explain the entire acquisition process, what the appraisal means, why we had an appraiser, why the appraiser met with them, what that value truly means, what that negotiation process looks like, and get the landowner to buy into not only, again, the process, but into the project as a whole. You'll find more times than not, the landowner opposition comes from, I'm going to say, a true lack of knowledge. They've heard rumors, or they have a understanding of the project which isn't real. And then suddenly when they realize what the project is and what the true benefits are, then suddenly the discussion changes. But, you know, it's the clip that reminds me, you know, the Florida selling the water tower. I mean, we've actually bought property from the wrong landowner. We've actually gone to court to condemn the wrong landowner. And so when you start looking through, you know, what is the process, if you miss a step, it's kind of embarrassing that, you know, in the end, I get the privilege of buying back something, or we go to court with somebody else, or we settle something that we didn't need to, or we didn't address a problem that we could have resolved and never let be a problem.
Yeah, it's one of those snowball things that can snowball out of control. I mean, I'd encourage folks in the audience to go and Google the Florida story if you want a quick laugh, cry. I don't know which, but I'll tell you quickly though. So they had, I think it was an old community center, from what I can tell from the stories, that they wanted to sell, and some private guy bought it and he was going to turn it into a gym, just a local gym. So he buys it from the city. And like a few weeks later, he gets all this documentation from the county about the property he's now acquired, realizes the water tower and a large parking lot that belonged to the city were adjacent to this gym, this community center, and he is now the owner of these other two things as well. So he had to contact the city. Eventually, he agreed to just give it back. So it has a slightly happy ending in that he didn't fight the city. He didn't ask them for a whole bunch of money. He was a resident. He just gave them money. They literally sold the water tower, and somebody did have to resign. I'm not sure who, but there was somebody in the administration who resigned over the issue, even though it had an okay ending. So that challenge to me is just, sometimes it's just as simple as the data. Where's the data? Who's looking at the data? Do they understand how to, what step one, step two, step three is kind of. But very good discussion. Thank you, panel. I want to move on to our next little topic here, which is specifically around the right-of-way process. And I think, as somebody just said, depending on the type of project, this part can really delay your timeline. And Jeff, I'll go to you first. I think this is accelerating the process. I'm sure sometimes it's not possible to really accelerate the timeline, but what are some of the things you've seen agencies do to manage this part of the process better?
Well, you bet. I'm going to focus on that third bullet there in your list. And we've kind of alluded to this already, but communication's the key. And that starts really early in the process. So for the project managers in the room, get in coordination with your right-of-way team at the very onset of the project. Have them assist you in developing the project schedule. Get their buy-in, get their commitment, and then don't wait for just-in-time communication. Keep communicating with them. Let them know the status of design. Let them know the status of environmental processes as particular. And then lastly is don't wait to start the processes. So there's certain things, even though we can't really start the acquisition until we have enough design and the environmental process completed, you can get things ready to go. You can have things ready to go so that when those big milestone events happen, you're not just starting the process then, you're now moving full speed into the process. Those are a few of my quick ideas.
Yeah, that's good. So sort of, don't necessarily do it in a, I guess, what we'd call a waterfall model where the one thing has to completely end. If you can get ahead of the game with something that's coming up, that's the right way to do it. James, I'll go to you next. Do you agree with that? Do you want to build on that?
I'm going to build on that because Jeff hit exactly where I was going to go, not only with the third bullet, but obviously the fourth. I mean, it's one thing to develop a plan. I mean, it kind of makes me laugh. I mean, when you look at boxing, some of the boxers in the past, one of their first thing was you can have a plan until you get into the ring, and after the first punch is thrown, then everything falls apart. This is the same way. It's one thing to, hey, we know we're going to move 15 homes. We're going through this neighborhood and we need to relocate all 15 of these residents. And I'm going to have an example for you. We came across a gentleman on one of our projects who had more reptiles in his house than a zoo has. You can Google this, ASIL.com, Google the Snake Man. We had over 800 reptiles that we got the privilege of moving because we didn't realize what his business was in a residential community in a home, and it delayed the process. It delayed the project. So again, having a plan, very critical, absolutely. Knowing the community, knowing the properties that you're going to acquire is critical. So the sooner you can bring the team on and get them to know who the impacts are, who the stakeholders are, that matters. Otherwise, you're gonna have a relocation that suddenly you have no idea how we're going to handle this, and we don't have the right team. We don't know what we don't know. And so planning, yes, critical. The communication, and Jeff was dead on with that. I mean, internally, externally, it has to flow. And you got to bring people in who are willing to have that communication and never stop communicating. And it's not just written, it's not just emails, it's phone calls, it's in person. If you can do virtual at different times, great, but that one-on-one person connection does matter.
Yeah, it definitely, and we said this. It's such a personal thing, maybe more so than other parts of a public agency, because you're talking about people's homes, and there's no way around that. It actually reminds me, we have a friend of Origo called Carlos, who you might know, James, who runs one of our state DOTs in the country here. And we were on a different webinar. We were actually talking about team management and building a great team. And I didn't know this about him. I guess he's now the director of a whole agency, but he either was a right-of-way agent or he had some involvement in the past with right-of-way. And he was talking about how that job, going out, and so in that job he had to go out and talk to people face to face to really understand these projects and understand these challenges. And he was making the point that actually prepared him for kind of a leadership position in the public life, because there was no better way to really connect with people than on their doorstep, I guess. So it's a very interesting part of of public works and so on. April, what about you? What sort of challenges, or have you seen folks in your area sort of handle the land acquisition and land management?
Well, I can build a little bit on what was discussed. For example, when in the district we had a bridge that needed repairs, like immediate repairs, and it also needed to be replaced. So we had to really do the research to understand who owned the bridge. Because like I said, you're in the district, you're in the federal city. It's 9 times out of 10, you may not know if you own something. So the bridge, we, after doing, research and really searching, who was responsible for this bridge, it was found that there was legislation where the bridge had to be transferred to the district, but it was never done. And as we went more into depth about it, we realized that parts of the bridge were given to a neighboring state. So those are things that we had to correct. And eventually, we started working on getting the process of transferring the bridge back to the district, because it was legislative, to say that, the district is supposed to have this bridge. So it was important for us to not only communicate with the federal agency that currently was, over the bridge, and even the neighboring state, and all of us getting together just to correct what should have happened years ago. And if we didn't get involved early in the process, we could have went way down the line knowing that this bridge needed to be repaired and these things weren't put in place. So, that's what I mean as far as communication is so important, because you have to be able to communicate with your right-of-way staff, with your engineers, with any stakeholders that you are dealing with, because things can happen. And as we would say in the district, as far as right-of-way, it's supposed, we don't know. So you have to be very careful and clear about what you own and what needs to be corrected.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, James.
I was going to say what April said was key, because with the bridge example, I mean, it literally does relate to private ownership. And sometimes we assume this person owns that, or that state agency owns that, or this river, stream, canal. Here in the West, water rights is a huge issue. Back East, not so much. But even with that, when you come across a river, who owns the river? Is it the state, the county, the federal government? Is there a different agency? Do you have permission to be on it? I know the Northwest is going through a federal mandate now because of a lawsuit that was recently won to restore the tributaries on the different streams and the canals. So you're having to go in and rip out all the old culverts. Who has permission to do that?
Wow.
And so that part of the history and that part of the research is critical to your project success.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Richard, one thing on the word accelerating, because we really haven't talked about that too terribly much, that I've seen is, it's amazing how often we run into the same landowners, particularly in urban areas, that we're dealing with things. And you learn over time which ones are sticklers, which ones are persnickety, if that's the right word. And sometimes those are people that the only action they respond to is illegal action. The other thing is you're going through negotiations. If you're a skilled negotiator, when the time has come that we're not negotiating anymore. So what I would say in the area of accelerating is, don't play the negotiation along forever. Somewhere along the line, you got to stop negotiating, and then you got to serve the legal papers. And more times than not, just that simple action gets their attention. You get the issue resolved, but it gets the project moving along. I've seen more and more agencies move in that direction with great success.
And to take that one step further on the accelerating part, use the tools that you have in your toolbox. Yep. If it's FHWA, they do have a different incentive programs that you can participate in and use, whether it's an incentive for early acquisition or early relocation, or you look at what works, what doesn't work, what your agency has approved and what is willing to accept, what's federally reimbursable, what's not, what the state is willing to pay. But then take advantage of those tools, use them. Then, like Jeff said, I mean, don't be afraid that, hey, the negotiation's not working. At some point, either you cut bait or you fish. I mean, choose what you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Let's move on. And this is something that, April, you were just talking about in a way, around the communication side of things. And to me, visibility means reporting, communication. And as we've said, there's always a lot of stakeholders involved. I don't think that you do a right-of-way project with minimal number of stakeholders. I think it's always varied. So it can be difficult to keep everybody in the loop. James, what sort of challenges have you encountered around communication, visibility, and maybe specifically reporting, that kind of thing?
Excuse me. I think the key to that is if you're not reporting and if you're not transparent and if you don't have some information that is public facing, that's where things get bad. And there is a balance between what gets reported, what is shown, what is not. But more importantly, especially among the team players, the more in a team environment you can share the information, the better it's going to be. Showing when parcels have entered into negotiation, when they have started to be either cleared for construction or they're entering in the condemnation process. Having, whether it's a GIS interface that you can see graphically. I know spreadsheets are not the buzz anymore, but sometimes a spreadsheet is a good way to track the data. And whether it's another database, Ergo and others have processes and systems built in ready to go to help with that process and taking advantage of that so everybody has access and can see this is where we are in the process. And with the project manager, meeting their schedule. This is when we're ready to let or advertise. Here's the limitations and what are those limitations and do we have a clear picture? For me, the part of this which in this process always gets overlooked, and you're gonna kind of laugh, right-of-way and utilities are joined at the hip. We get focused on right-of-way, we forget we're buying right-of-way for utilities and what the utility relocation is gonna look like. And did we bring those two discussions into a singular conversation? If you didn't do that, I guarantee you're gonna have a problem where, hey, we thought we're done, but now you have this entire utility corridor that we get the privilege and the opportunity of playing with again. And when you talk about the landowners that you've hit before, those repeat offenders, they love it when you come knocking a second time.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff. Great. April, you mentioned a few things already around communication. Anything else you had to sort of overcome at DDOT with just, reporting or connecting either up or sideways in the organization?
I think our biggest thing is people as early as possible. That's why surveys were so important. Getting a survey it identifies what's out there, and it helps us to be able to identify those stakeholders or identify those adjacent properties that are being impacted, because that's the biggest thing. We want to know what we're impacting. That way we can come up with some sort of plan to address those things. If we need to engage that, and like you said, utilities, that's a big part of surveying. We have to know what's out there. If we don't know what's out there, we don't know what we're impacting. So with that, we did have community meetings where we did, inform the community what was coming. We always had stakeholder meetings with whoever the stakeholders were, whether it be a federal agency, utility company, even transits for such as WMATA, because you could be touching so many properties and so many people that you have to be as transparent as possible, because one thing I learned in the district is that communities do talk and neighbors do talk. So, you can't just say, oh, we're not going to say it, because it is at some point going to get out there. And then you do have council people that you have to inform about a project if it's affecting their district and the people in that district. So that's for me, that was the biggest thing: the surveying, getting title work, because title work will give you a clear understanding of who owns what is attached to that property. So, and those are all preliminary things that you can do prior to the NEPA being approved. So that way, when you do get into the project, you would have done all of the preliminary work to really put together a good acquisition schedule. Now, mind you, things can change. You can schedule, and sometimes things that come up will change the schedule. But you put in concessions for that, because sometimes that can happen.
I think April hit on a key thing there. She started listing the details of the acquisition and the right-of-way process. And so many times a project manager will look at the scope and the cost and the whole schedule, and it's like, it's too burdensome. Let's cut certain things out. Well, if you start cutting out title work, if you start cutting out survey work from different states, you can't do that. That's legally required as part of that process. The appraisal as part of FHWA, that's required. You can't cut those processes out. So, and you can't compress the time either. So you have to literally look at the schedule as a whole and not keep trying to compress right of way. But like we said at the very beginning, you bring them in at the very beginning and you allow them to naturally move with the entire team. And as changes are made, then they can adapt to them. But you can't wait till the end and then expect a miracle. I mean, as a landowner, we have the right to review the documents, and we have the time to either accept or reject the offer. You can't compress that time frame. And then, because according to the federal requirement, coercion is a bad thing. So however you want to define what coercion is, and condemnation and the threat of condemnation can be that bad connotation, which we don't want to bring. I mean, it's used in good ways, and it's used when it's needed. So the key is, like April mentioned, you prioritize as you go through this, you understand what the impacts are, you bring the teams in early, and then you have the success that you need.
Yep, absolutely. Jeff, before we move on to our next topic, anything to add there around visibility or reporting?
I'll keep it rather brief, but I think for the program, everybody in this needs to kind of understand where management's coming from, right? And typically what I've learned is management's worried about the flow of money. As soon as they can get that money spent, they can go get more money to do the next project. So they're going to be very keen on these schedules and what you put in there as a date certain, when they can get cost certainty. How much is this project actually going to cost? And then there's the second important group, particularly of those of you on this audience that are from local governments, and that is our elected leaders want ribbon cuttings. They want to go out and show what's happened while they've been in charge. And so they're going to be very keen on these schedules, because they want to go out and, particularly in advance of election times, be able to show the public, look what project I got done while I was your mayor, your council person, your county commissioner, and so forth. So it gets back to getting involved, getting the right-of-way team involved very early in the process to get their schedules in, so that there's no surprises. And probably the biggest trip up I've seen in time is that project managers wait, or they assume how long things are going to take on their own before they even coordinate with the right-of-way teams. And that's what trips up schedules more than anything, which trips up getting the money out and getting those ribbon cuttings.
Yeah. Yep, of course, it's a series of dependencies, right? So you've got to make sure you have your ducks in a row. It's one thing I know we've helped customers with is, as we said, it's very detailed. You can be doing one project, could have 100 properties that are all in different statuses, and just one of the challenges is getting the reporting right in the sense of extracting the exceptions, I would say, so that you're not just looking at a huge sheet, but really identifying, okay, these are the 3 things we want to talk about for this project that are going to be a risk, and kind of elevating that up. And, that's one of the things that I know we work with on our customers. All right, let's move to the next topic then. And we mentioned this before as well. I sometimes think that right-of-way and the legal are almost synonymous. They're almost, as soon as people think right-of-way, they think eminent domain and lawsuit, and we're going to be in court. So it just goes hand in hand. It's you just tied at the hip, probably more so than other parts of the capital program. So. April, back to you. What are some of the ways that an agency can sort of reduce that legal risk?
Well, I know at DDOT, as a right-of-way team, we worked very closely with our legal department. We had two real estate attorneys that we worked with that were very knowledgeable, not only with real estate, but they were also knowledgeable with right-of-way. So we all worked hand in hand because we had to make sure first that we were compliant, that there wasn't any anti-deficiencies that were going on. We also had to make sure that whatever language, because we have agreements that we have to work with, whether there be right of entry agreements, TCEs, which are temporary construction easements, or deeds, or any type of legal document. You got to have an attorney review it. They have to give legal sufficiency. So they have to be in the process, because they can more or less say, okay, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. This law says that you probably can't go here. And what's so very important is that oftentimes in the district, we ran into issues where we had infrastructure on property that we did not have interest in, meaning we had no type of ownership, no easement, no anything, because we do a lot of TOJs, which are transfers of jurisdiction, where it transfers the not the ownership, but the pretty much the maintenance and control of the property that our infrastructure was on. So the legal department is really an important part of the right-of-way team, and I think they kind of keep us legal. That was our thing in the district. They keep us legal. They keep us compliant, and I think that is one of the things that are really important when you have a project.
Yeah, thanks. Jeff, same question to you. What are your thoughts around the legal side of things?
Yeah, fortunately, most of our right-of-way acquisitions go peacefully, and we're able to get them done with not a lot, but often they do go into a legal situation. And one of the things I've learned is that there's a lot of pressure on the real estate department and the lawyers to settle. We want this settled, but you got to understand that you're working with somebody that's very angry and has got a lot of tension often in the situation. And so what I would guard against in the effort to settle, don't settle for things that are poor solutions. And I'll give you an example of one where we had a very difficult landowner that, in fact, once we started construction, approached the project staff with shotguns and told them to keep on their side of the line. But while we were in the court situation, we set the right-of-way agent that worked for me at that time settled, and we would put in a snow storage area, but there was no definition of what a snow storage area was. And we ended up spending 2 more years in court defining what snow storage area meant. And so very big caution, don't get ahead of yourself. Take the time necessary to go through the legal process right the first time, because if you don't, you're going to be paying more and more over time. And that's one of those hard lessons to learn.
Yeah, we were talking to a port authority, marine port authority, must be about 4 years ago now. It's in the Gulf. It's one of the big ports in the Gulf, and this port happens to be right next to it goes through the city. It's right next to downtown, and they got into some legal issue with the city over a project because it's like a highway that's going right next to the port. And this lasted for a couple of years. I'm not sure. I just remember them saying after that, they then bucketed all their projects between, like, so everything that was on that side of the port became a city project, and we're dealing with that separately because there's all this interaction with the city that we, so they almost had like a SWAT team that would deal with those projects because they knew how to deal with the city, and then everything else they just sort of got on with a slightly different process. So that's how they sort of handled that risk going forward, which I thought was really interesting. James, what about you? Any interesting stories to share around the legal side of things, or how you saw folks handle that?
A lot of legal, yes. The third bullet point, there's one word which we put on the slide, which I love because I love to also change it, and that's the word fairly. You know, everybody that's on here are DOTs, and so you're getting federal money, so you are required to follow the Uniform Relocation Property Acquisition Act of 1970. The key word in that is uniform. You can't treat everybody fair, but you can treat everybody uniform. And there's the key to this. Because again, the moment you start deviating from the process and you start ignoring the regs and the rules and the state and local laws, you get yourself into trouble. And then suddenly you find yourself in court. And then the irony behind that is suddenly now you're not on the favorable side. We've had several cases, you know, with the department where we've actually had projects stopped. And rightfully so. Citizens got together, they sued the state, they shut down a project. This department had not done everything it needed to begin with. We correct that, we move forward, then the project moves forward. But again, it's all about the processes and doing everything correctly. And every time you start to shortchange or shortcut or eliminate a step, when you forget a step, something goes back. Which is why, again, you cannot shortcut the process. And trust the process. When you trust it, things go right. But when you end up in court, there's nothing worse than standing before the judge and realizing, yeah, we missed steps 5, 7, and 15 out of 45. And the judge says, congratulations, go back. And when you're done with that, then we'll look at this again. So we start over in that process.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, or yeah. You know, you didn't do the appraisal right, or it was the wrong, you know, landowners, you didn't make the offer. Or we've had some things very, very subtly. You know, spelling errors on right-of-way maps or spelling errors in deeds or documents. And it's enough for the opposing attorney to make the point that, Your Honor, we don't know who this person is because that's not who they are. And we got to start over.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I feel like
comes into play big time.
And it's not, I don't know, like if you're putting up a building or a bridge or whatnot, you know, safety aside, you always got to worry about safety, but there are ways I feel like you can sometimes catch up on the schedule. But with right away, it's like, nope, it's step 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you miss step 2, you're going back whatever step, you're going all the way to the beginning. And there's no quick, easy answer that you can get around it. All right. Well, thank you, panel. Let's move on to our last topic, which is around technology. And folks, we're seeing your questions come in. So thank you very much for your questions. Please keep them coming in, and we'll have some time at the end for our panel to answer them. But very quickly on the technology side, the graphic that you see there is an example process of how someone might go through and evaluate technology options and picking a technology vendor. We have a guide available, so please reach out to us, which is all about, you know, what the best practices are to take your agency through looking at a potential technology partners and what you need to consider. So, you know, please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like a copy of that. But Jeff, maybe I'll go to you first. In terms of evaluating vendors and picking the right partner to work with, and then leveraging that technology correctly, what are some of the best practices you've seen in your career?
Well, whether you choose Argo or some other enterprise-wide system, you got to make sure you automate the correct and proper process. And what that takes is getting all the subject matter experts together, making sure everybody agrees, and take the opportunity to revisit the process. Are we adding steps that we don't need to add, or is there a step we might have missed that we need to add? Because if you don't automate the right process, then you're automating nothing at that point in time. So having worked on several enterprise-wide efforts, that's probably the biggest case study I've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes in my experience, that can take the longest, is just figuring out how you want your processes to run. Once you know that and you've argued out all the details, then implementing it can actually be the easy part.
Correct.
Yeah, very good point. James, what do you think?
The key to that is, again, not removing processes, but the other subtlety again is when the project is done, right-of-way doesn't go away. Right-of-way keeps on giving. It is literally that gift that keeps on giving, because you acquire it today and now property management kicks in. They get to manage the property, and you have to have a way to track that management, whether you're leasing, you're going to eventually sell it, or the department keeps it as an asset. If you're leasing it, how do you track and maintain that? If you're going to sell it, what can I sell? Am I going to sell again what's under the road and I get the privilege of buying it back again? Or did I need it for a future use? We bought it because of the impacts to the project, but now it was a great laydown yard for future projects. But hey, we didn't realize that, so we sold it, and now we get to buy it back. Or, I mean, the scenarios continue. So the key for right-of-way and that understanding with project managers is it's not a one and done. When you, the project manager, close this project, right-of-way lives on. We're moving right-of-way lines today to sell properties that we bought back in the 1930s, because now it's no longer truly needed. So you think, okay, almost 100 years ago it was needed. Well, now it's no longer needed. Now there's an asset the department can take care of. Well, where do we find it if it's not in a database or in a system that allows me to understand, search it, report on it, get data on it? If the information is not there, then I need to do something different. But right-of-way doesn't stop. I mean, it is an ongoing, loving process, which is the great industry in which we are a part of.
Yeah, that's something we talk about with that. One of the things we always talk about with our customers is how much of your historical data do you want to bring over to the new system? So that and usually it ends up being some kind of staggered approach, like, okay, well, we'll get, everything going back 3 years, and then we'll go back further and further in time. And but it is amazing, often it's not unusual that we're dealing with paper records that are on paper, because the last time whatever that the property was updated or whatnot was predates, the personal computer. It's from the 70s or 60s, 30s, as you said. So yeah, very, very interesting technology problem for us, actually, is having that discussion. April, anything you'd like to add on the technology side and what you've seen work?
Well, kind of expand a little bit more on property management, because that was what I did when I was at MTA in Maryland. And one thing that we looked at was that, okay, we need to develop something where we can better track what properties we own, what properties we managed. So what we did is that we had all these file cabinets that had nothing but records, nothing but as-built, agreements, everything. So we took all those file cabinets, and what we did is we scanned everything and we put them in a database, which made it more accessible for us to get. So if somebody came and inquire about a property that MTA owned, it was easy for me to just go look it up, see what we own, how much we own. I mean, because we owned everything from rail lines to old freight rail lines that were on the Eastern Shore, that dated back to the 1800s. Sometimes we had properties where the tracks were completely gone. So I had to, realize, okay, if I looked at a document, okay, how much of that property is ours and how much is the adjacent owner? Or, if we had stuff transit like light rail, just knowing, okay, if somebody wanted to access property next to ours or work on one of their, like, for example, the utility company wanted to work on something that was near the tracks. There were particular standards that we had. You had to be a certain amount of feet away from the track. You had to be able to red tag the line. So, being able to know what it is that you own out there is very important, and it's critical. And even in the district, we were also trying to develop a system where we could track what property the district owned, because again, it was the federal city. So a lot of the properties at the time weren't controlled by DDOT. It was controlled by another agency. I think it was the Army Corps of Engineers, and a lot of that stuff was transferred to us. So it's really understanding and getting a clear understanding of what you actually own, because you don't want to run into a situation, and we did on a couple of projects, where the Capitol Police is coming out and telling your contractors, you're on our property, you need to get off. So those are some of the things that you have to think about, and it's very important. And it's correct. Right of way does not end; it continues on. Well into property management. So it's important to have a process. And one thing a lot of state DOTs have is that every 2 years they have to update their right-of-way manual. And those are the times when you can really look and say, okay, how can we streamline this process? What can we do better? How can we update? Because those manuals tell you exactly the rules, procedures, and processes that the state follows when doing state projects, even when there's federal money or even local money involved. The two really don't differ. So technology is very important, and technology is changing every day. So it's important to keep up on it.
Yeah, thanks so much, April. I'm finding it hard to imagine a more complicated right-of-way situation than DC, with the Virginia and Maryland and the city all passing over each other. So it's great to hear from you and your experiences. So thank you so much for the discussion panel. I'm going to hand back to Stephanie.
Yes, so we have a couple of minutes left, and we might go a little over, but can everyone just take a couple of seconds to answer the question above? We want to know, what are your primary challenges in your current right-of-way process? Select all that apply. And then also, just to kind of give us a better understanding, out of all the topics that we discussed, what would you like us to kind of dive in deeper? So if you don't mind taking a couple of seconds, and then we'll go over, because we have about 3 to 4 audience questions, but please go ahead and submit. And there's once we hit to about 50%, so please go ahead and answer the poll above. But thanks to our panelists so much. And you know what, while we're launching the poll, I'm going to ask a question just for the sake of time. So this can either be answered by any of the panelists. In terms of staying organized, how are you separating your inventory? Are you separating your inventory by project, by county, by file? How would you best separate your inventory when you're staying organized? And I don't know if whoever of the panelists wants to take that question.
I can go first.
I'll have April, and then Jeff, you can go on there.
I know when I was at MTA, we separated out by what was rail line, meaning what was active track, what was freight line, what was light rail, what was bus in transit, and then we had parking lots and parking garages that we also managed. So we kind of separated it out from there. And then we looked at, okay, what county it was in, because MTA owned a lot of property throughout the state of Maryland. So we would categorize it by what the mode was, and then we would separate out what county it was in. And then that kind of helped us keep track of where properties were, what mode it was.
And then Jeff, do you want to add on to that? Because I know you also.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the joy of modern technology is we can track on all three of those, by the road, by the county. or by the project. So they would all be cross-referenced in there. So if you're looking at it from the highway perspective, you could look at all US 20 highway projects. You could look at from all those different angles.
So
And I also launched a second poll. Looks like people are going in, but go ahead, James. Thanks.
I say we group it by project initially, but like Jeff said, the beautiful thing about databases, you can cross-reference and you can search for multiple things as long as the database is set up that way. But ideally, a project is on typically a state route or an interstate, and you can track it that way to begin with, or like April said, along a rail line, so you know what the corridor is, and that kind of gives you that initial start to see where things are and then move from there.
And do we have time for one more question? I'm going to ask the final question. We're a little over, but every panelist mentioned including right-of-way early on in the process. We've talked about that. We discussed that a lot. Can you guys give a good example of when you had a successful project where you actually included right-of-way early on in the process? And James or April or Jeff, whoever wants to take it first. James, it looks like you're ready. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll dive in first. I mean, the successful projects are the ones that do not require limitations or letting with any type of limitation at all. You're ready to advertise and the contractor can go forth and conquer, and everybody's schedules are exactly where they need to be. And that doesn't mean that you can't do design build or you can't do progressive design build, but knowing also, which we didn't talk about, is the delivery method. What is the project? What needs to happen up front, and then adjusting right away to meet those needs so that right away is always ahead of the project, and then you have that success. You never have delay claims. You never have a contractor that is revamping his schedule because right away didn't do what needed to be up front because that communication didn't happen. I mean, beautiful success is the contractor starts, and like Jeff mentioned, everybody wants cones, the orange barrels today, gone tomorrow. So if we can help in that process, that makes all the difference. And then the public is happy, and that's where the investment continues to work for us. They're willing to invest more in the projects that we go after.
All right. Well, this is time. Thank you, panelists, so much. That was a great, great, great discussion. And as we all know, right-of-way does not get enough attention. It does not get enough. We need to start training. We need to start talking more about right-of-way and also shining a more positive light on the overall right-of-way process. So thank you guys all so much and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.